So this is essentially a terrorist group masquerading as a political party that is infiltrating British Parliament.
Now, when you see this sort of coverage, it must make you quite nervous about where the left in Britain is going on discussions about race and British history.
The really worrying thing here, the intimidation, the threat, and the very palpable violence.
Hello, I'm Charlie Peters, the national reporter at GBNews. I want to have a discussion today about a story, an exclusive that we've brought onto the channel because a Tory peer has been urged to withdraw from a controversial parliamentary group after it emerged and we revealed that that group, the African Reparations APPG, had hosted a conference that included a politician from a party that is linked with pro-racist and pro-violence rhetoric. Now, Lord Ed Vaizey, a former Tory culture minister, is the sole Tory and Conservative member on the APPG on African reparations. Now, the group itself is supported by several Labour MPs. Its chair is Bell Ribeiro Addy. It's also heard from Diane Abbott, Clive Lewis, and several other members of the left of the Labour Party. But under parliamentary rules, an APPG needs to have at least one representative from the main opposition party. They could be from the Commons, they could be from the Lords. Now, in the case of this group, the African Reparations Group, which has only been around since 2021, the main opposition representative is Ed Vaizey. He's only been an officer on the group since August of this year. Previously, for 3 years, it was Peter Bottomley MP, who is the member of dozens of APPGs, and it appears he has retracted his support for the group after a previous report from GBNews on the African Reparations Organisation. Now, what was this conference? Well, it was their annual conference hosted in central London in late October, where members discussed a range of issues related to the reparations cause. And that's not just about financial reparations, but also, they would say, cultural reparations. They're interested in the restitution of artifacts. They're interested in discussing about African narratives, as they put it. Now, I watched several of the speeches from that conference, and some of them did stick out as being controversial, especially when we consider that the parliamentary credibility is afforded to this group by virtue of the fact that it is an APPG. First and foremost, the major speaker across several panels is a lady called Esther Koze. She's a notorious activist within the Pan-African movement and black activist groups within the United Kingdom. She is the general coordinator of a group called Stop the Mangamizi. Now, this group is the co-secretariat of the APPG, which means it has an organisational function. Now, one of the panel speeches that she gave at the conference, Esther Koze, made a comparison between the law in Britain and what she referred to as African law. She lamented the rule of law in Britain, it appears, as being laws for colonisers and enslavers. Let's take a look at that clip.
We're not going to go very far if we keep using our enslavers and colonisers' visions of law. Okay? We have to restore our people's law as African people. And the two systems are there, already in operation.
Now, Esther Koze had previously made comments reported on by this channel about how Black Britons were the first ones in Britain, that they were potentially the original indigenous background to the United Kingdom. She's also made some controversial claims about Black Lives Matter, that activist organisation, and foreign intelligence agencies. In one clip that we put on the channel last year, Esther Koze appeared to say that there was an agenda fuelled by MI5, MI6 and the CIA, which involved BLM. She didn't expand on that further at the time, and when I asked her for some clarification in an email, she did not respond. She has not responded again for an attempt to seek clarification on those remarks you just heard about African law and the enslavers' law. Two split ideas. But it's not just Esther Koze that has attracted concern from some of the commentators and politicians I've spoken to. There's also been a degree of, quite frankly, shock about the presence of another activist, Piaba Modokwe. Now, she was an MP in the Economic Freedom Fighters group. It's a major parliamentary party in South Africa. It was quite recently in government as part of a widespread coalition, and its leader, Julius Malema, has made several extremely controversial remarks, including in one case referring to the need to cut the throat of whiteness. Now, he's always said, and the party has always said, that that was metaphorical language, but he's also said that the only white man you can trust is a dead white man. Metaphorical or not, that is not the sort of language that you'd expect to see appreciated anywhere in the world, and in particular, not in the United Kingdom, where race relations are so advanced. And by any measure, this is considered one of the most anti-racist societies on the planet. And this conference thought that a speaker from that political party in South Africa would be an acceptable person to host. Again, I asked that representative, Ms. Modokwe, and the APPG's organisers if they were concerned about giving a degree of credibility to the EFF and its past comments, its pro-violence and anti-white racist rhetoric, but they did not respond when contacted. Now, I've heard from senior Tory MPs, including at least one member of the newly formed shadow cabinet, who have said that they are very concerned about Lord Vaizey's membership of this APPG. One of them told me it was deeply unhelpful and that, in effect, Ed Vaizey was affording this group to have the credibility it desires through parliamentary association. Well, Ed Vaizey, as I understand it, was approached to join this group because of his background and his interest in the restitution and cultural artefacts. I also understand that he was not aware that the conference was going ahead, and he hasn't attended any of the events so far. He hasn't attended an AGM or any of its meetings. One wonders why he joined the group at all. Well, joining me now to discuss this further is Dr. Philip Kiszely, a senior fellow at the New Culture Forum. Dr. Philip, thank you very much for joining me. Now, when you see this sort of coverage of a group like the African Reparations APPG, it must make you quite nervous about where the left in Britain is going on discussions about race and British history.
Yeah, it's extremely worrying. I mean, let's just go back to the Economic Freedom Fighters Party. This is a Marxist-Leninist group. Now, economic freedom and Marxist-Leninism don't really go together. But their president has, you mentioned about slitting the throat of whiteness. He's also gone on record and said, never be scared to kill. Now, there's nothing metaphorical about that. That's very direct. And their youth leader has posted instructions online about how to make petrol bombs. Okay, so this is essentially a terrorist group masquerading as a political party that is infiltrating British Parliament. Now, we've got previous of this from other left-wing lunatics, I would say. Jeremy Corbyn and his friends Hamas and Hezbollah. This is the same thing, isn't it? You know, so they never learn. This is not about a clear and definite and fair engagement with slavery, historical slavery, okay, and coming to terms with it and getting to grips with what it means. It's not about that at all. Diane Abbott was at this conference, and she introduced herself, Charlie, as a descendant of slaves. Now, I'm sure that's true, but she's probably also a descendant of slavers, because Africa was a slaving continent. The currency of Africa, way before any European person set foot on there, was slavery. The problem, the difficulty was in stopping it. Okay, so when Britain went out of its way and huge personal and political and economic costs tried to stop slavery, it found it very difficult, especially from figures like King Gizo of Dahomey, for example, who just would not stop. So this isn't this very simplistic narrative that the left always come up with, which is white bad, black good. And you cannot audit history. It doesn't work like that. It's too complicated. It's too messy. Okay. You look at people like me and you. Okay. For example, right? This is an example. I'm a white middle-aged male. Okay. But my background is Slavic. Okay. So my ancestors were Slavs, the original slaves, and latterly moved to Hungary, who were colonized by the Austrians, the Nazis, and the Soviet Union. What do I do? Do I go cap in hand wanting reparations from the Russians? Of course I don't. It's stupid, because history doesn't work like that. This is just ideological. But the really worrying thing here, as you say, is the intimidation, the threat, and the very palpable violence that is not only in the language of our people and our politicians. Think about Dawn Butler this week, okay, but with these terrible, frankly terrible people that they're inviting into Parliament.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you've just mentioned, this is an ideological perspective in your view. But are you concerned that it might be a bit more than that? That this is actually about a more base and emotional and deep-seated possible hatred? Because some of the other language that we heard at this conference included an academic lamenting white economic power. Now, to specifically refer to white economic power it should be, I mean, forgive the pun, I imagine, beyond the pale. But for other, you can never imagine that language being used about being concerned about the gathering of Jewish economic power or Asian economic power in societies where those groups overperform the average economically or in the jobs market. That would be completely unacceptable. But for some reason, at a conference in central London, hosted under parliamentary credibility, with MPs from the governing party, and indeed with, in effect, the tacit approval by virtue of membership of a peer from the Conservative Party, some people appear to support discussions about white economic power. Is that purely ideological, or does it go further into a perspective of hatred towards white people? Are we seeing this emerge more openly and flagrantly now?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And I think the two are very intimately linked. Okay, I think ideology is used as a cover for bigotry and hatred. Okay, but the difficulty we've got here is that we're all quite used to this language. So, for example, if we're talking about white privilege, okay, primary school children are taught about white privilege. There was a story, I think just last week or the week before, about a council taking up this initiative of showing young children how to play Monopoly, but giving white children more money and giving them less time in jail to demonstrate their privilege. Okay, now that's child abuse, okay? Child abuse is happening in that way quite easily. Okay, so it isn't a massive conceptual leap to then think about white hatred in an adult kind of way. And it's just framed, it hides behind this be kind of language, this, well, it's white privilege, okay, and there've been terrible historical injustices. Yes, there have been terrible historical injustices, but there were historical injustices to everybody. What about the white working class who were working in factories and mills in Manchester in 1850? What about the poor women in Whitechapel in the 1880s? You can go on and on and on. History treated everybody terribly. But if you're just picking one group and you're saying, these are the only people who were treated badly, okay, and you're picking another group and you're saying, these are the only people who were wicked, it's simply not true, okay? So what you're doing then is you use all of this ideological language, and it masks what the Labour Party do. I mean, you see this for example, you see this in the Middle East, don't you now? Okay, so the pro-Palestine marchers, okay, They're marching for pro-Palestine, and they're saying that there's an Israeli genocide and all of that kind of thing. Completely not true, but they will not engage at all with the fact that on October the 7th, there was a pogrom in which 1,200 people were slaughtered, raped, and God knows what else. So this discussion, this ideology, is very, very frightening because it frames things and makes them acceptable when, of course, they're completely unacceptable. And that's what we've got here. We've got this kind of black power movement, which is looking, if you take it to its logical conclusion, it's looking to enslave white people.
And Philip, I mean, the discussion that we're having now and the story that we've broken today hasn't come in a vacuum, of course, because at the same time as this reparations conference was being hosted, Sir Keir Starmer wasn't too far away from the discussion himself. He was in Samoa for CHOGM, the Commonwealth gathering, where he rejected demands amid the reparations debate. He said that he was looking forward rather than looking backwards. And Number 10 said that the reparations debate was not on the agenda of that meeting. However, Labour MP Clive Lewis, who is a part of that APPG on African reparations, said that Starmer had adopted a colonial mindset to the summit by trying to dictate what could and could not be discussed at the end of the summit as well, potentially under that pressure. Starmer was among the 56 Commonwealth leaders who signed a document that called for a meaningful, truthful and respectful conversation regarding justice over the transatlantic slave trade. So, Philip, is this not an example of essentially the soft left giving some degree of credibility to the far left, allowing them to be part of the discussion? The far left then push the Overton window to the extreme, and then the soft left are pressured to catch up. And so you get an extraordinary situation where you have a reparations conference and an APPG formed to discuss this issue, putting forward, by any metric, the more extreme view on this issue. And because Starmer's permitted it in some way, and because it's on the agenda in Samoa and he's under pressure from these leaders from the Commonwealth, he then finds himself cornered into admitting some of these things. Do you think that the leadership of the Labour Party at the moment means that they won't crack down on this APPG? They won't crack down on associations with the economic freedom fighters, and they won't dissuade their MPs from attending conferences where people refer to African law in Britain and complain about white economic power?
Yeah, no, of course they won't, because they deal in racial hierarchies, and the top of the racial hierarchy is black skin. I mean, I'm all for a clear and honest and direct conversation about the past. I'm a historian, but if you do that, then you have to say, well, actually, what were the benefits of the most benign empire in the world, the British Empire? Okay, I mean, you can list them. You know, you've got health, you've got education, you've got an end to tribal warfare. You've got stability, you've got women and children generally being safer. And all you have to do is look at Diane Abbott and Clive Lewis. They've done okay for themselves. What are we doing? Are we giving those people reparations? We have to think about the slave trade and, as I say, slavers within Africa, okay? But we also have to think about Britain stopping the slave trade. And then we have to think about other slave trades, like the trans-Saharan slave trade, for example, which routinely castrated its male captives. Now, there are lots of people who are descendants from those slavers who live in this country. But the problem is they've got brown skin. What are they going to pay reparations as well? It gets extremely complicated. And as I say, are reparations good? I don't know what your descendants went through. It's history. It was probably hell. Yeah? Are you going to get reparations as well? It doesn't end. It's just about power. It's just about race. And because, to answer your question, Keir Starmer has always paid lip service to these crazy theories and concepts and ideas. Okay, whether he believed in them or not, it doesn't matter. But he's paid lip service to them. And now he can't go back on them. You can't go back on critical race theory. They don't let you, just as you can't go back on genderism. So, yes, he's in a mess, but he deserves it. He's never going to back down to people like Dawn Butler, because they absolutely have the power in the party. The problem is we pay the price.
Yes, and as you say, they do feel invincible, don't they? These activist MPs within the Labour Party, Keir Starmer has so far not really formally and publicly reprimanded any of them, despite many of the interventions they've made since his government came to power. I mean, just this week we saw quite an extraordinary social media post about Kemi Badenoch from Dawn Butler. Last month, I revealed that her Black History Month video included a praise for several, a celebratory collage of several murderers and rapists. And she issued a quite remarkable spoken verse, sort of spoken word poem about Black History Month, where she appeared to criticize white people for getting a tan because they wanted to have skin like hers. That's really odd stuff. And Diane Abbott, of course, he couldn't manage to expel her. Somehow she's also invincible. I suppose we've said enough about the Labour Party on this issue, but that is definitely a problem for him. I just want to, if I can, finally turn your attention to the Conservatives, because that's the real hook of my story. The real concern that I've heard isn't really about those Labour MPs, because as we say, they're just sort of expected to do this stuff and they're going to get away with it. No one's going to criticise them. It's what they do. It's what they're going to continue to do. But to have a Tory peer on this group, it appears without doing much research, it appears he didn't know about the conference, but still, Lord Vasey, the former culture minister, should be smart enough to do a bit of research about an APPG, especially one with such a controversial title as African Reparations, and African with a K, which does denote some potentially unique perspective on the issue using that spelling. Why has there not been a Tory on the record for my story? Why do you think that the Tories who have spoken to me about this have done so on background, have told me in private that they think this is a bad situation? Do you think they are also nervous about dipping their feet into this issue, that they're scared of appearing racist potentially for criticising the African reparations movement and this group in particular, even when you have someone from a political party that is linked to pro-violent and anti-white racist rhetoric? Why are they shying away from this? Why are they not holding Ed Vasey to account?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think they are terrified of the race question. I also think that part of it is that they just did no research, as you say. So Ed Vasey is almost a kind of paper candidate in a way. Yes, I'll put my name there. And then afterwards, it's sloppy, it's lazy. They find out precisely what it is. They find out the kind of people that this group are hosting, and it's embarrassing to them. But let's not forget, Ed Vasey has a Jewish background, and this group seems to me to be completely dedicated to racial hierarchies and race power. It must sit very, very uncomfortably with him. So it's a real own goal for them to be part of it. Yes, it's an all-party thing, but surely they just could have said no. There's a quasi-terrorist group involved here. But I mean, let's just get back to the race thing and how the Tories are tiptoeing around this. I don't think they need to. It's the biggest mistake they can make. What they really need to do is they just really need to push away the whole identity politics thing, the political correctness thing, the woke thing. If you go out into the country, if you get, as you often do, right, as you often do, but if you get away from Twitter, if you get away from the online bubble, if you get away from Westminster, everybody hates this stuff. Okay, the voters certainly in the red walls, and don't forget they got the red wall vote in 2019. But the classic Tories, the voters in the red wall, everybody apart from a tiny minority of the cosmopolitan elite, they all hate this stuff. The best thing the Tories can do is take it head on and be straightforward and honest. It's difficult for politicians to do, I know, but the best thing they can do is to be straightforward and honest. and bat it out of the park. They have Kemi Badenoch as leader now. I don't want to think she's there so she's got these points, because of the colour of her skin and her background. I want her to be there because she is a great leader. She is a great intellect. I really want her to push back on that, on those terms, on no other terms. And if I could give the Conservative Party advice, that would be my advice.
Well, it's some free advice. Let's see if they take it, because as they stand, the Tories are a member, by virtue of having Ed Vaizey as an officer, of the APPG on African reparations. Dr. Philip Kiszely, the senior fellow at the New Culture Forum, thinks that the Conservatives should push back on what he says is nonsense, not lean into this identity politics perspective. But as I said, as it stands, the Tories are, in a way, keeping this debate alive by giving parliamentary credibility to some of these extreme voices that I've had described to me as crankish. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Philip. Thank you for your time. And thank you for watching. And you can hear more discussions like this on the GB News YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe. Thank you.